Last week, Apple released iOS 18.2, which expanded Apple Intelligence to some new regions and introduced features like Genmoji and Image Playground. You might have noticed that I haven't made a video about it here on the channel, and that's because I've been really disappointed by it. I think Genmoji and Image Playground are gimmicky features that most people will probably open once, play around with for a few minutes, and then never touch again. It's kind of a damning indictment of Apple Intelligence that the most impressive feature that Apple has added is ChatGPT. But I think the integration of ChatGPT has been done extremely well. So I thought I'd make a video where I show you 10 amazing things that you can now do on your iPhone thanks to the inclusion of ChatGPT. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, very quickly, before we begin the video properly, I do just need to make sure that we are all on the same page regarding the requirements. This is an Apple Intelligence feature, so you need to be running Apple Intelligence on your device to use any of the features that we'll cover in this video. This means that you'll need an iPhone 15 Pro, 15 Pro Max, or any model in the iPhone 16 range. You'll also need to be in one of the regions where Apple Intelligence is currently supported. I've included a screenshot on screen showing the currently supported regions and languages. If you've ticked all of those boxes, then you are ready to move forward. Head into your settings, go to Apple Intelligence and Siri, and make sure that Apple Intelligence is already enabled. Next, scroll down to the section that says Extensions and tap on ChatGPT. Make sure that the option to use ChatGPT is enabled. You can sign into ChatGPT if you like, but honestly, you don't need to. The main benefit of signing in with your user ID is that it links any chats that you have on your iPhone to your ChatGPT account. But you may prefer to keep this all completely anonymous, and if that's the case, simply don't sign in. You might notice a section about advanced capabilities mentioning daily limits. Don't worry too much about this. Essentially, if you're a ChatGPT Plus subscriber and you sign in, you'll have pretty much unlimited access to the version of ChatGPT currently integrated with Apple Intelligence, which is GPT 4.0. If you don't sign in, you'll still get access to GPT 4.0, but with daily limits. And once those are used up, you'll switch to GPT 4.0 Mini. In my experience, there is no real difference between the two. So unless you notice a change in speed or quality when using the mini version, I would recommend not signing in and simply using ChatGPT on the free account. Also, let's just talk about the different ways that you can access ChatGPT. In general, you're going to access it via Siri, but there are a few different ways to do this. The first is to access your iPhone's voice assistant, ask your question, and see if it identifies that it's the kind of question that should be sent to ChatGPT. If it does, you'll see a button that says Ask ChatGPT. You tap on that, and your iPhone will send the question or request to ChatGPT. But you can override this if you wish by accessing Siri and saying Ask ChatGPT 2, followed by whatever it is that you'd like it to do. This essentially cuts out the middleman. You can also use this feature when typing to Siri by double tapping at the bottom of the screen and beginning your request with Ask ChatGPT when typing it out. Here's a useful tip for this. Set up a text replacement for the phrase Ask ChatGPT. Go to Settings, then General, scroll down to Keyboard and choose Text Replacement. Create a new text replacement for the phrase Ask ChatGPT using whatever shortcut you like. I use the letter A 3 times. Now, whenever I'm typing to Siri, I can just type the letter A 3 times and I'm ready to communicate with ChatGPT. Okay, let's look at some examples. General knowledge has been greatly improved on your iPhone now compared to Siri thanks to the inclusion of ChatGPT. In general, if Siri realizes that it can't answer your general knowledge question, it will immediately ask you if you'd like to use ChatGPT instead. For example, I asked my iPhone what the starting price is for an M4 Mac Mini, and I was given the option to either search the web or use ChatGPT. In other words, Siri didn't know the answer to that question. When I used ChatGPT, it came back with the correct answer of $599. Next, I asked how many albums Charli XCX has released, and again, I was prompted to use ChatGPT. Interestingly, ChatGPT got the answer wrong, saying that as of December 2024, she'd released 5 studio albums. The actual answer, according to Wikipedia at least, is 6. It missed an album from earlier this year. I think this is because ChatGPT, like all large language models, has a data cutoff, and I think the version integrated integrated into Apple Intelligence has a cutoff around mid-2023. That said, it is interesting that ChatGPT did know the starting price of the M4 Mac Mini, which is much more recent information. It is something to keep in mind when you're asking general knowledge questions. Some data may not be up to date. I then asked an older question that I thought Siri might be able to answer. When did the Great Fire of London start? Siri got this one right, using Siri knowledge, and identified that it began on September 2nd, 1666. But if you try to ask a follow-up question, Siri can't provide an answer. For example, I asked, when was the Great Fire of London and what was the cause of it? And my iPhone prompted me to use ChatGPT instead. ChatGPT got the answer correct, identifying not only the start date, but also where the fire first started. I spend pretty much all of my working life building content and tools to help other people learn, but I'm guilty of not always investing in my own education as much as I perhaps should be. So I recently started using Masterclass, who are partnering with me on today's video. Masterclass is all about insights, tools, and ideas that will change the way you see and experience the world. So I already knew that Masterclass had amazing content from the world's best chefs, actors, artists, and music producers. But more recently, they've added loads of content around business and entrepreneurship, which is right up my street. So yesterday, I was taking a class on Masterclass all about habits by James Clear. He talks about this idea of the aggregation of marginal gains, where you try to improve every aspect of your life or your work by just 1%, and all those 1% add up to a major improvement. And it's amazing. Already I've been able to find parts of my business where some small tweaks could make a massive difference. Simple things like standardizing my sound and lighting settings to speed up my workflow or improving the quality of the titles of my videos. Super valuable stuff. Members get unlimited access to thousands of online lessons from over 200 expert instructors teaching a wide range of subjects, allowing you to gain new skills 10 minutes at a time. Check out Masterclass today and turn your professional aspirations into achievements. Click the link in the description to get started today for 15% off. I've already mentioned in this video that you don't need to be signed in to ChatGPT in order to use it with Apple Intelligence. In fact, for most people, I think it's actually better not to sign in. Staying logged out keeps your requests completely anonymous. But one downside of not being signed in is that your chat history isn't saved. If you want to refer back to a result later on, you won't be able to. Of course, you could manually copy a result by pressing the copy button in the upper right corner of the ChatGPT window, but there is an even better way to save results directly to your iPhone. All you have to do is say make a note out of this whenever you get a result from ChatGPT. So here I've just used Siri to ask ChatGPT a question. The result is now on my screen and I simply say make a note out of this and a new note is automatically created. You'll see a small notification appear at the top of your screen. At that point, you can either ignore it, the note is saved automatically, or tap on it to open the Notes app and view the content that's just been created. ChatGPT also means that your iPhone has had a significant upgrade in its ability to answer complicated questions. You can either ask Siri a complicated question, wait for it to realize that it can't answer, at which point it'll ask if you want to use ChatGPT, or you can just jump straight to ChatGPT yourself. So here are a couple of examples. For the first question, I gave ChatGPT some information about the average fuel consumption of a car, the current cost of petrol here in the UK, and then asked it to calculate how much an upcoming journey would cost. ChatGPT quickly and easily processed the information and gave me a total, something that Siri simply couldn't do. For the second question, I asked ChatGPT to work out the best time for me to hold a 1-hour Zoom call with a colleague in Tokyo and another in New York. I wanted it to figure out a sociable time for all three of us, considering the different time zones. And once again, it handled it really well. A really useful ChatGPT feature is its ability to compose using writing tools. For example, you can take a regular note created in an app like Notes and use ChatGPT to turn it into something more polished. Here's how it works. In this example, I've got a note listing some issues with a fictitious car. To use ChatGPT, I access the writing tools and tap on the Compose button at the bottom of the screen. Then under the Compose with ChatGPT option, I hit the dictation button and ask it to do something for me. In this case, I'm asking ChatGPT to use the bullet points in my notes to create a short but polite email that I can send to local garages asking for quotes on repairs. ChatGPT processes the request and quickly comes back with a very usable email that I could copy and paste into my email app and send off. Even better, at the bottom of the screen, ChatGPT gives me options to refine or rewrite the email further. It also suggests additional details that I might want to include, like a request for the estimated time for completion, questions about warranties on repairs, or a breakdown of individual costs. By the way, have you ever watched these videos and thought, how am I supposed to remember all of these tips? You might be interested in the training portal that I'm building, iPhone Essentials Plus. It's more than 100 tips for your iPhone, broken down by category with text, screenshots, and video for every single tip. There's no ads, no sponsors, just content. It launches very soon, and if you want to be the first to know when it launches, scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the video description. Apple Intelligence allows your iPhone to summarize emails for you, and it does a pretty good job most of the time. For example, here I've got a deliberately overcomplicated and lengthy email. At the top of the email, there is a Summarise button. When I tap it, Apple Intelligence generates a summary of the email. But even after reading this summary, it is still convoluted, and I'm not entirely sure what this person is actually asking me. So instead, I could ask Siri to send this email to ChatGPT and have it summarized in simple terms, something a 10-year-old could understand. When doing this, you'll be given the option to include a screenshot of the email or its full content. Make sure that you select the full content before submitting it to ChatGPT. Sure enough, it processes the email and reveals that this person is essentially asking me to invest money in the stock market. What's great about using ChatGPT is that I can then ask it to draft a short, polite reply, letting the sender know that I'm not interested. And as expected, ChatGPT handles this really well, creating a concise response that I can send off straight away. So something Apple Intelligence is supposed to be good at is taking complex notes and converting them into bullet points by extracting all of the key information. But as you can see in the example on screen, I've been unable to get this to work a lot of the time. This has happened with a few different notes that I've tried it with. ChatGPT, on the other hand, does this pretty flawlessly. In this example, I've got a very convoluted mess of notes from a fictitious job interview. Using Siri, I can ask ChatGPT to summarize this note into bullet points, focusing on just the key information and also extracting the next steps that I'd need to take as a hiring manager based on this data. And as you can see, ChatGPT does a great job, turning the note into something much more usable. Apple Intelligence gives you the ability to summarize articles in Safari. Here in this particular article, I can tap the reader button in the address bar, and you'll see that if I tap show reader, there's a summarize button. When I click on this, Apple Intelligence generates a summary of the article. These summaries are okay, but in my experience, they are a bit short and oversimplified. They give you a very high-level overview of the article without including much of the useful information. If I want something more detailed, I'll need to use ChatGPT. So what I would do instead is ask Siri to send this article to ChatGPT and have it summarized for me. As always, you'll need to make sure you provide the full content, not just a screenshot. And as you can see, ChatGPT quickly provides a much more detailed summary with all the key points included. It's still a lot shorter than reading the whole article, but it's detailed enough that I'd actually come away with all the information that I need. While still in Safari, you can also ask ChatGPT to analyze what you're looking at. If you try this with Siri, you'll find that it doesn't really understand the question. When I tried asking Siri, what am I looking at? It kept giving me my home address, which clearly wasn't what I wanted. But when I asked Siri to send the same question to ChatGPT, it worked perfectly. ChatGPT correctly identified that I was looking at an image of a boat on clear blue water, likely taken from an aerial perspective and designed as a wallpaper download. It even picked out details like the photographer's name and the username of the person who posted it. Your iPhone has a feature called Visual Lookup. This is where, when you're in a photo, if you notice the Visual Lookup icon down at the bottom of the screen, between the Favorites button and the Edit button, it's your way of knowing that your iPhone has identified something within the image. This could be a landmark, a place, a type of bug, or an animal. More recently, it's even been expanded to include things like food or laundry care labels. The thing is, it is a bit hit and miss. It works well on some photos, but doesn't work at all on others. And even when it does identify things, in my experience, it can often get them wrong. ChatGPT can do this too, and in general, it is much more accurate and much more consistent. For example, in this image, Visual Lookup has identified a landmark, and if I tap on it, you can see that it correctly identifies Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. To be fair, the photo includes location metadata, so it is possible that Visual Lookup is also pulling some of its information from that. But in the very next photo, taken just a few seconds later in the taxi that I was traveling in, Visual Lookup didn't work. If I instead ask ChatGPT to identify what's in this photo, you can see that it correctly identifies the Singapore flyer, the observation wheel visible in the image. In another example, Visual Lookup has identified laundry care icons in this particular image, and if I click through, it's done a pretty good job of identifying them correctly. I can also ask ChatGPT to identify the same labels, and it does a good job too. The next photo is an example where ChatGPT becomes more useful than Visual Lookup. This is clearly a picture of Eggs Benedict, and Visual Lookup has identified it as classic Eggs Benedict, offering links to recipes online that I could click through to. But with ChatGPT, I can go further. I can ask it to identify the food and request a recipe, and even ask it to turn that recipe into a note for me. It's much more practical than just using Visual Lookup. In the next image, I don't even bother asking Siri to use Visual Lookup. Instead, I go straight to ChatGPT and ask it to identify what I'm wearing in the photo. You can see that it correctly identifies that I'm wearing a grey hoodie, a pair of VR goggles, and even a microphone. I can then ask a follow-up question, such as, what virtual reality goggles am I wearing? And ChatGPT correctly identifies them as the Apple Vision Pro. Lastly, here are a couple more examples of where ChatGPT is practically more useful than Visual Lookup. In this photo of a book, Visual Lookup can identify the book and even provide a link to Apple Books where I can buy a digital copy or read reviews. But with ChatGPT, I can go further and ask if the book is any good. ChatGPT will identify it and provide a summary of what people thought of it based on reviews online. Finally, I have a receipt in this next example. I asked ChatGPT to extract specific data, like how much I spent on milk and dark chocolate. ChatGPT gets it almost correct. It identifies that 89 pence was spent on fresh milk, 95 pence on dark chocolate, but there were 2 bars of dark chocolate on the receipt, so the total isn't quite accurate. Still, it is a good example of how capable ChatGPT is at extracting data from an image. Image generation is an area where ChatGPT absolutely wipes the floor with Apple Intelligence. Image Playground, in my honest opinion, is nothing more than a gimmick. It's the kind of tool that you'll probably open, play around with once or twice, and then never use again. I really don't see any practical use for it whatsoever. Here's a great example. I opened Image Playground and asked it to create an image of a young man sending a message on his iPhone. Exactly the kind of scenario that you would think an Apple device would be designed to handle. But no matter how I phrased the request, I was either told that my language wasn't supported or that Image Playground simply couldn't create that kind of image. So instead, I turned to ChatGPT. I asked it to create an ultra-realistic drawing of a young man sending a message on his iPhone, and seconds later, it generated a very usable image. From there, I can save the image directly to my phone using the Save button if I want. You can do a little bit of work with files using Apple Intelligence, but it's really limited in terms of what you can actually achieve. For example, you can open a PDF, try to select all of the text, then use writing tools to ask it to summarize or pull out key points. But in my experience, if the PDF is longer than a page or two, this method really doesn't work well at all. ChatGPT, unsurprisingly, handles this really well. For instance, I have a document opened in the Files app, a PDF containing details about a new build property, covering things like water, the oven, settlement, and more. Using Siri, I asked ChatGPT to summarize the document, but I specified that I only want information related to the plumbing and boiler. As always, you'll need to make sure that you submit the full content of the document, not just a screenshot. And sure enough, a few seconds later, ChatGPT returns a detailed summary, not just of the entire document, but focusing specifically on the points that I asked for. It's a great practical example of how you can use ChatGPT integrated into Apple to pull useful information from files. So there you go, that's 10 examples of how ChatGPT can be used to enhance what you do on your iPhone thanks to its inclusion with Apple Intelligence. I've no doubt that I'm just scratching the surface of what this is capable of, and it's definitely something I'll be exploring more in the coming weeks and months. If you found something amazing that you think should be added to this list, drop me a comment and let me know. And as ever, if you found this video useful, do please consider leaving me a like and subscribing to my channel for more content like this in the future. See you on the next video.